Today, there have been unconfirmed reports that the giant Finn McCool has gone into winter hibernation. Now, earlier today, saw the legendary Finn disappear into a magical doorway within the rock face here at the Giant's Causeway.
What if I told you one of the world's most famous natural landmarks isn't entirely natural? At the Giant's Causeway, a tourist's drone captured 11 seconds of footage that shattered everything we thought we knew. A solid basalt slab slid open like a door, revealing a hidden chamber.
Well, that footage is absolutely incredible, isn't it? Well, earlier today, tourists, historians, geologists, architects and giant experts all congregated here.
And inside, figures sealed in stone, standing upright as if waiting. Authorities locked the site, but sensors still show movement. What is really hiding inside the causeway, and why has it stayed secret for millions of years? The door in the causeway. Let's set this up properly because the location matters. The Giant's Causeway sits on the north coast of County Antrim, Northern Ireland. It's one of the most visited natural landmarks in the British Isles. Roughly 40,000 interlocking basalt columns rising from the shoreline.
For some, this honeycomb pattern of 40,000 basalt columns is a geological wonder.
Like the remains of some ancient staircase built for something much larger than a human being. The official geological explanation is straightforward. During the Paleogene period, somewhere between 50 and 60 million years ago, massive volcanic eruptions sent lava flooding across the landscape. As that lava cooled,
columns of the Giant's Causeway were actually formed by a volcanic event more than 50 million years ago.
And it contracted and fractured into these hexagonal pillars. Nature doing what nature does. But the locals have always told a different story. In Irish legend, a giant named Finn McCool built the causeway stone by stone to cross the sea and fight his Scottish rival. It's a myth.
For others, like former guide Hill Dick, it's a playground for the mind, and the home of a mythical giant named Finn McCool.
A fairy tale, the kind of story you put on the back of a tourism brochure and smile about. Except on this particular Thursday afternoon, and neither version, the scientific one nor the mythological one, could explain what a tourist's drone was about to record. The man who launched the drone wasn't looking for anything unusual. He was a visitor with a camera and a social media account. He wanted aerial shots of the columns from a high angle, something cinematic, something worth posting. The drone lifted off, climbed above the cliff face and swept along the formation. Waves crashing below, and tourists in bright jackets scattered across the rocks. Hexagonal pillars stretching in every direction toward the waterline. Beautiful footage, standard footage. Then, on the eastern face of the formation, near a cluster of tightly packed columns that rose higher than the surrounding rock, something changed. A section of the basalt began to move. And I need to be very specific about what that means. Because this is the part that separates this story from every other strange geological event you've ever heard about. The rock did not crack. It did not crumble. It did not shift from thermal expansion or tidal pressure or any of the 100 explanations your brain is reaching for right now. It swung open, one smooth, deliberate, controlled motion. Outward, like a door on a hinge that had been oiled yesterday. Silent, precise, mechanical in its perfection. In Park Ranger Thomas Brennan was standing about 40 meters from the cliff face when it happened. He grabbed his radio to call it in, but his hands were shaking so badly he dropped it twice before he could get a transmission through. His voice cracked when he said the word door. He told dispatch the rock had opened outward, smooth and controlled, and that it looked like the mountain was exhaling. 3 other witnesses on the ground confirmed the exact same observation independently. And the slab held open for 11 seconds. You can count that in your head right now. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. That's a long time for a piece of 60-million-year-old volcanic stone to hold itself open like a gate. Then it slid back into the cliff face, and it sealed itself shut. No gap, no hairline fracture, no visible seam of any kind. The basalt looked completely solid, as if the slab had never separated from the cliff at all. The stone erased every trace that it had ever moved. But here's the detail that nobody on site could shake afterward. Before the door opened, at least 4 people reported hearing a sound coming from deep inside the rock. They described it as a low, rhythmic pulsing, slow and steady, like breathing, like something enormous pulling air in and pushing it out behind a wall of stone that should not have been able to move. When investigators pulled the drone footage and examined it frame by frame, every timestamp was intact. No edits, no cuts, no digital manipulation. The footage was clean, but what stopped them cold was what the frames showed after the door sealed shut. Nothing, no evidence, no crack, no trace. The cliff face looked like it had been solid since the day the lava cooled. Whatever opened in that rock wanted to be invisible. And if that drone hadn't been in the air at exactly that moment, it would have been. Echoes from stone. Now, here's where this story stops being strange and starts being something else entirely. And because the investigators didn't just watch the footage and file a report, they brought equipment. And what that equipment showed them is the reason some of these people have not slept properly since. Ground-penetrating sonar was deployed across the section of cliff where the movement was recorded. The team expected to find a shallow cavity, maybe a natural void in the basalt, created by a trapped gas pocket millions of years ago. Standard geology. That's what they were hoping for. A simple, a boring, completely explainable hollow space behind the rock. That is not what they found. Dr. Margaret Sullivan, a geologist from Queen's University Belfast, was the first to process the sonar returns. She pulled up the initial scan on her laptop, leaned forward, and did not move for close to an hour. Her assistant brought her coffee. It went cold on the table beside her, untouched. When her colleague, Dr. Ronan Gallagher, walked over and asked what she was seeing, and she held up one hand without looking away from the screen and said 2 words. Not yet. The scan revealed a sealed chamber behind the basalt wall. That alone would have been significant enough to rewrite the geological profile of the entire Giant's Causeway site. A hidden chamber inside a 60-million-year-old volcanic formation is not something you expect to find on a Tuesday. But the chamber was not empty. And that's where this goes from unusual to something I genuinely don't have a comfortable word for. Inside the hollow space, the sonar detected several tall, narrow, upright forms, standing in a line, evenly spaced, perfectly still. Their proportions were humanoid, what appeared to be shoulders, torsos, heads, but their height exceeded 8 feet, far beyond any known human population, ancient or modern.
Possibly plausible that the legendary and mythical giant Finn McCool is indeed sleeping within the mountain.
Dr. Sullivan ran the scan 3 more times. She swapped the equipment. She recalibrated from scratch. Every single pass returned the same image. The figures were there. They were real, and their positioning inside the chamber meant something that she could barely bring herself to say out loud. Basalt does not form around objects in perfect upright positions unless those objects were already standing before the rock hardened. Think about what that means. These figures, whatever they are, were standing in a line, evenly spaced, motionless, while molten volcanic rock flowed around them and sealed them inside the earth. They did not fall, they did not attempt to flee, they did not collapse under the heat. They stood in place and allowed 60 million years of geological history to close around them like a coffin. Dr. Gallagher leaned over Sullivan's shoulder to look at the screen and immediately stepped back from the table. He didn't say anything for several minutes. When he finally spoke, he asked Sullivan to run the scan again. She told him she already had, 4 times. He sat down, and according to the assistant who was present, he put his head in his hands and stayed that way for a long time, arranged like soldiers awaiting a command that never came. That's the phrase Sullivan used in her preliminary notes. Soldiers, awaiting a command, standing at attention inside a mountain sealed in volcanic stone for 60 million years. Waiting. For what? The wall that watches now. And I could end this story with the sonar images, and it would already be one of the most unsettling things I've ever covered on this channel. But I can't end it there. Because what happened next is the part that the people involved tried very hard to keep quiet. When the sonar team packed up their equipment that evening, the lead technician, a man named Declan Foley, who had worked subsurface imaging jobs for 14 years, walked to his supervisor, set down his headset, and asked to be reassigned. No drama, no argument. He just said, calmly and clearly, that he was not going back to that section of cliff. When his supervisor pressed him for a reason, Foley explained that during the final sonar sweep, the equipment had picked up a secondary signal beneath the standard geological returns. A faint, repeating vibration passing through the rock wall in a slow, rhythmic cycle. And he said it didn't match any geological signature he'd encountered in 14 years of fieldwork. He said it sounded biological. He said it sounded like something behind the wall was breathing. And then he said the thing that made his supervisor go quiet. He said it felt like whatever was producing that signal knew the equipment was there, that the rhythm had shifted, subtly, almost imperceptibly, the moment the sonar was aimed directly at the chamber, and as if something had turned its attention toward the scanning beam the way you'd turn your head toward a sound in a dark room. Foley finished his shift. He drove home. He never came back to the project. But the story doesn't end with one technician's gut feeling, because the sensors they embedded in the rock face were never removed. They were left in place, transmitting data to a remote monitoring station. And 3 months later, when Dr. Imea Maguire, an environmental monitoring specialist, was assigned to review the accumulated sensor data, she expected to find exactly what you'd expect from a 60-million-year-old rock formation. Ambient noise, thermal expansion, tidal pressure, routine readings. That is not what she found. The sensors were detecting a repeating vibration pattern behind the basalt wall. Low frequency, consistent interval, the same slow, arrhythmic pulse that Declan Foley had flagged on the night of the sonar sweep. But here's what changed everything. Dr. Maguire pulled 6 months of continuous data and overlaid the readings on a timeline. The pattern had not only persisted through every single day and night for half a year, it had accelerated. The interval between pulses had shortened by nearly 12% over 6 months. I want you to really hear that. Whatever is producing this vibration is not winding down. Yes, it's winding up. It's getting faster. It's becoming more active. Over 6 months of continuous monitoring, the rhythm behind that wall has been steadily increasing, like a heartbeat climbing from rest towards something else entirely. But the acceleration wasn't even the most disturbing part of Maguire's analysis. On 3 separate occasions, the vibration intensity spiked dramatically. Sudden, sharp increases in the signal strength that lasted anywhere from a few seconds to several minutes before returning to baseline. And when Maguire cross-referenced those spikes with the site's maintenance logs, every single one of them corresponded exactly with a time when human beings were physically present near the restricted section of cliff. The first spike happened when 2 workers approached to check the rope barrier. The second occurred during a nighttime equipment check. The third was logged on a morning when a group of tourists wandered past the restricted boundary before being turned back by staff. 3 spikes, 3 instances of human proximity, a perfect correlation. Dr. Maguire sat with those numbers for 2 full days before submitting her report. She told a colleague off the record that the data suggested the vibration source was not passive. It was not geological pressure releasing. It was not tidal rhythm or thermal cycling or any of the dozens safe explanations she had tested and ruled out one by one. The pattern responded to proximity. Something behind that wall was reacting to the presence of people on the other side. She used one word that her colleague said she had never heard Maguire use in 15 years of working together. She called it aware. Ancient stone, modern mystery. Now, if this were an isolated incident, you could maybe dismiss it. A weird geological anomaly, sensor glitch, overactive imaginations. But here's the thing that I kept coming back to the deeper I went into this story. Ireland is not the only place where sealed stone moves on its own. In southern Turkey, there's an ancient necropolis called Myra. Hundreds of Lycian tombs carved directly into sheer cliff faces more than 2,000 years ago, stacked on top of each other like apartments for the dead. And here's what the archaeological surveys found that nobody talks about at dinner parties. Some of those tombs show evidence of having been resealed from the inside. Scratch marks scored into solid rock, grooves that match human fingernails, carved by hands that were supposed to have been dead and buried centuries before the marks were made. The lion tomb at Myra contains 11 life-sized stone figures, and embedded in the stone around them, researchers found traces of organic material, biological material that should not exist inside a sealed stone chamber unless something living was present when that stone was carved or sealed. And deep inside chambers that had been closed and airtight for centuries, chambers with no oxygen, no fuel source, no possible ignition point, investigators found scorch marks, burn patterns on the walls, fire burned where fire should have been physically impossible. That's Turkey. Now go to Kentucky. Mammoth Cave, the longest cave system on Earth, is over 420 miles of mapped passages, and estimates suggest there could be hundreds more miles still unexplored. Expeditions have documented something that nobody has adequately explained. Passages that were open and accessible during one expedition are found sealed shut during the next. Not collapsed, not blocked by rockfall, sealed, as if the stone rearranged itself between visits. Deep inside the system, explorers have discovered mummified human remains thousands of years old. Some positioned as though they knelt down deliberately and chose to die in the darkness rather than leave. And in chambers that have been verified as completely empty, no people, no animals, no water movement, no wind. Audio recordings have captured faint sounds, whispering, sounds that audio analysts have compared against every known language, every known animal vocalization, every known geological phenomenon. No match. The sounds don't correspond to anything in our databases. Stone doors that move in Ireland, tombs that reseal themselves in Turkey, passages that rearrange in Kentucky. And in all three locations, sounds from inside sealed rock that should not be making any sound at all. I'm not going to tell you what to think about that, but I am going to tell you that calling it coincidence requires ignoring a pattern that stretches across 3 continents, multiple millennia, and geological formations that have absolutely no business behaving the way they're behaving. Something is consistent here. Something connects these sites, and whatever that something is, it doesn't care whether we believe in it or not. It just keeps doing what it's been doing behind stone walls in the dark for a very long time. And here's what bothers me the most about all of this. These are just the sites we know about. The Giant's Causeway discovery only happened because one tourist happened to have a drone in the air at exactly the right moment on exactly the right afternoon. Myra's tombs only revealed their secrets because researchers happened to look closely enough at scratch patterns that had been dismissed for generations. Mammoth Cave only showed its hand because teams kept detailed enough records to notice that passages were changing between expeditions. How many other sites are out there? Oh, in mountain ranges, nobody has scanned. In cave systems, nobody has mapped. In cliff faces that have never had a sonar beam pointed at them. How much of this is happening right now in places where there are no drones, no sensors, and no one watching? What's waking up? After the sonar results were filed and the sensor data started painting a picture that nobody wanted to look at too closely, authorities moved fast. And they moved very, very quietly. Access to the eastern section of the Giant's Causeway was restricted. There was no public announcement, no press conference, no headline, just a rope barrier and a small sign referencing geological instability. That's the phrase they used, geological instability. As if the cliff might crumble, as if this were about safety in the way you normally think about safety. But the sensors stayed. They were never pulled out of the rock. They are still there right now, embedded in the basalt. Transmitting data 24 hours a day to a monitoring station that somebody is still checking. Because the vibration pattern has not stopped, and the intervals between pulses continue to shorten. The legend of Finn McCool says, a giant sleeps beneath the causeway, waiting for the day Ireland needs him again. For centuries, that story was treated exactly the way you'd treat any myth, a charming piece of cultural heritage, something to print on a postcard, something to tell children. And nobody took it literally. Why would you? But the locals who live near the causeway, the ones who walk those cliffs at dawn before the tour buses arrive, before the gift shops open, before the world shows up with its cameras and its certainty, they don't talk about Finn McCool the way the tourism brochures do. They talk about him the way you talk about something you're not entirely sure is still asleep, carefully, quietly, with one ear always turned toward the rocks. Some of them say they've heard the breathing themselves. Late at night, when the wind drops and the sea goes still and the only sound should be the slow pull of the tide, a low, steady rhythm rising from the stone, always from the same section of cliff, always from behind the rock that moved. 3 weeks before I finished writing this script, a fisherman anchored near the base of the eastern cliff face reported hearing something he described as slow or heavy breathing rising from the rocks just above the waterline. He said it sounded close. He said it sounded patient. He said it sounded like something that had been waiting for a very, very long time and was not in any hurry because it knew, with absolute certainty, that its time was coming. He pulled the anchor. He left. He hasn't been back, and the sensors are still recording. The vibration is still accelerating. The figures behind the wall are still standing in the dark, are exactly where they've been standing since before anything we'd recognize as human civilization existed. 60 million years. That's not patience, the way you and I understand patience. That's something else. That's something built into the fabric of whatever these things are. A willingness to wait that makes geological time look rushed. The stone door opened once on camera. It held itself open for 11 seconds. But here's the question that nobody involved in this investigation can answer. And believe me, I asked, how many times has that door opened when nobody was recording? How many times has it opened in the dead of night, when the tourists are gone and the rangers are asleep and the only witnesses are the waves and the dark? How many times has something stepped through? Beneath the giant's causeway, something that shouldn't exist is moving. A stone door, sealed for 60 million years, has opened once, and the sensors tell us it's not finished. In similar pulses are being recorded at sites across the globe, in tombs and caves where rock itself seems alive. What connects them? Who or what set this rhythm? The answers aren't coming fast, and they may not come at all. But one thing is certain. The deeper we look, the less the world makes sense. So the question remains, when stone begins to remember and the intervals between its pulses reach zero, will we be ready to face what wakes next?